Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Werner. I lead product marketing at Fido AI. And yeah, we're excited to have you here today for a webinar I'm really excited about talking about a lot of the litigation that's been happening with websites and privacy. Um, we've talked a lot about in the past a lot of the regulations and issues regarding CCPA, and there's been this entire time a lot more lawsuits in the private realm. So we're going to dive into that today. So I'm here with my colleague Patrick Murphy. He leads up our customer success team, and yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself as well, Patrick.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, really excited for today's webinar. We'll be doing some Q&A and polling question time as well as we get going in, but we'll take you through kind of a presentation really fast, and then we'll get into the product itself where I'll kind of guide you through how my teams are using it today to help really amplify and mitigate risk and increase their understanding of what's actually going on their phones, apps, and their websites. Thanks, Ben.
That's exactly right. So yeah, just before we get started. The typical housekeeping things. This webinar will be recorded. We will share the slides and the recording afterwards. So yeah, I've got a really detailed presentation I'm going to go through for about half the webinar. Please do ask questions throughout. We want to make this interactive. So we'll try to answer them as we go, and both during my presentation and the webinar. We'll jump into it. Before we get into it though, like I said, here's the agenda. So we're going to look at what's causing this increase in privacy litigation. Look at, what are the biggest risks on websites and mobile apps that are leading to these lawsuits? Why a privacy auditing solution is needed to ensure that you're going to be, reducing risks against these lawsuits, and that having a CMP is not sufficient because it doesn't verify any compliance on your website. And then we're going to go into a demo of how our auditing solution works. So before we get going in the presentation, I want to do a couple polls to see just how this issue is how big it is with this audience. So just looking at who here is on a privacy team or legal team at a company. So if you could just answer yes or no. Okay. So we've got okay. All right. So about 80% of people. Okay. And you hear the results. So most people here are on the privacy team at a company. And yeah, how many people on a privacy team or legal team? How many people have? Let's see if I can launch this next poll. How does this work? Okay, stop sharing. All right, how many people have received a demand letter for a SEPA or online related privacy lawsuit? How many people or your company has received? Okay, so we've got about 50% of people. Okay, so this is a relevant issue. Um, okay, so now we're showing about 40% of people uh, have received such a demand letter related to SEPA or another online related privacy lawsuit. And last one here. So I need to stop sharing this one. Last one. How many people are there at their company have a regular privacy audit program for their website or their apps? No, I'm not sure. Okay. So about 50% of people do, which is maybe more than I thought. But yeah, some people are not sure. About 25% at no. Okay. So yeah, it seems like this is a relevant issue and problem. I'll share the results here, so you should be able to see them. So yeah, a good amount of people have a privacy audit program. Some people are not sure. Some people do not have it. So that's what I'm going to go into today is, what's going on, why this auditing is needed. All right. Okay, so moving into the meat of the presentation. So maybe you've seen this slide before. We've shared it maybe a couple times in a couple of different avenues. So everything up here is pretty much up and to the right. The only thing that's not is on the CCPA fines because we have 2026 in there and it's only a quarter way through the year and we already have half as many fines as we had last year. But the larger numbers obviously in the middle and the right graph. So the SEPA lawsuits have been growing exponentially or not exponentially, pretty consistently every year to about 3,000 last year. And VPPA is, although order of magnitude smaller, still very considerable number of VPPA lawsuits. And many of those are a higher percentage of those are made public, and those also have yielded pretty hefty settlements. So why is this happening? Right. So we obviously have the California privacy laws, and they are kind of the standard for privacy in the US, but they do not allow for private rights action. So the California Invasion of Privacy Act, the Video Privacy Protection Act there, they allow for a private right to action. So meaning anyone can file a lawsuit and they're not the only laws. So what's interesting too is that these laws have been around for the VPPA has been around for 30, 40 plus years. CEPA has been around for 60, 70 years, but these lawsuits didn't really happen until recently. And a lot of the strategy is just looking at how companies and their websites are not complying with CCPA and basically making the claim that they're also not compliant with these other laws. So, and these laws are not prescriptive. There's not a black or white, you know, way to just determine whether, any website or mobile app is compliant or not compliant with SEPA. VPPA is a little more clear because it's just about video viewing history data. But yeah, the courts are still interpreting, how to deal with how to interpret SEPA with online privacy, but the reality is the plaintiff's strategy is working, right? They're filing these lawsuits, they're going to court, they're getting very large settlements. And it's not just these laws. So if you look at any SEPA settlements, there are a number of other laws that are always included. And we'll go into some of those today. There's usually three, four, five, maybe even 10 laws included. So it's not just SEPA. And the reason why this is all happening and plaintiffs are taking and lawyers taking advantage of this is that most websites and apps are sharing personal data with advertisers even when users opt out. So that is the overall CCPA compliance issue. So what is I guess, how widespread is the compliance or non-compliance in the US? So from our research and using our auditing solution, we found that 76% of the 100 most visited websites in the US do not honor CCPA opt-out signals. And on average of those non-compliant websites, there's 69 violations per website. So there's a very high level of non-compliance, and so it means there's a lot of opportunity for lawyers to sue for any of these laws mentioned here today. Someone was asking about how many participants in the webinar right now. I was just thinking that there are 140 people here. So um, just so you know. Okay, moving on. So why are these risks so widespread? So, I mean, our perspective we'll discuss this today is, there's a lack of privacy auditing. So clearly, some people here, about 50%, said they have some sort of privacy auditing program at their company. Most companies have a CMP, right? This consent management platform is designed to manage consent, but not verify compliance. That's really the gap. There's not compliance checks that are part of the solutions. And even if it was set up correctly one day, there's constant changes to websites and apps that can create new risks on a weekly basis. It's not just from the website, even the third-party solutions, right? Meta Pixel, Google Pixel, they can change how data is flowing. There can be a new web page. There can be a new campaign that the marketing team is adding. And the marketing teams are incentivized to share this data with third-party advertisers, with Meta, with Google, because it improves their marketing performance. It improves how much they can measure their marketing performance. As a marketer, as someone who is I've worked at Google. I've worked at a trade desk. This is true. Like they do the more, yeah, cookie tracking and the less privacy that your marketing team respects, the more the marketing team can show performance and improve performance. And so if they're the ones managing the CMP, they're incentivized not to promote privacy compliance. And yeah, oversight. So privacy teams typically, like I was just saying, are not in control of the CMP, and there's not a lot of visibility into what's going on with their website or app in terms of privacy compliance. So I'm going to dive into this big table here and looking at like some of the causes and costs of recent private privacy lawsuits. So, not regulator led, but uh, yeah, on the private side. So these are just the ones that we've been able to, find out about in the past 9 months, I would say. I mean, not to say these are every single one, but the issue is there's a lot of most of the lawsuits are confidential, and there's the settlements are not known, right? So if you get a demand letter, you pay the settlement right there. It's none of it's going public, right? And even the stuff that does go public, there's very little written online about any of these. If you were to Google some of these here, the only article written is probably the one on our website on the internet, other than the one that just collects the people that are trying to get their payout from the class action lawsuit. So from the two biggest ones here, Kaiser Permanente from this year, 46 million, Aspen Dental last year, 19 million. And if you look at the reason for why these are happening. These are just ones we know about, but you can see bolded on the right side, they all have in some way to do with sensitive data. So four of them are sensitive health data. So, that breaks a number of laws, as you see here. And there's health related laws, there's HIPAA, right? And so that really increases your risk of a large settlement. And there's the VPPA one with Fubo, so that one involved video history data and also included SEPA, and then the CA Civil Code. That one there is just the same law as the VPPA, but just for California. And yeah, and then there's the MyFitnessPal one that does include sensitive health data, but also calls out that the data was shared despite the user opting out. So that shows that it's following the same CCPA compliance standard of not respecting opt-outs. And then the most recent one from just a couple weeks ago is Perplexity. So it doesn't say anything about health data, but it calls out the sensitive nature of people's chats to Perplexity being sent directly to Google and Facebook, and even in incognito mode, which is can be like, similar to someone trying to opt out of data sharing, right? So those are the reasons you can see on the right side. And then in the middle, you can see there's a number of laws. So all these involve SEPA. Most of them involve the eCPA. So the eCPA is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, I believe. And it's very similar to SEPA, except for it's the federal version. So yeah, just another thing to add to the case. It offers uh, twice as much of a payout per violation. So it's 10,000 versus 5,000. Um, but it doesn't have as high of a standard for privacy as SEPA. So SEPA is saying that both parties need to be aware of, like wiretapping and recording going on. So it's a two-party consent model versus eCPA is just a one-party consent model. So the standard is lower, the payout is higher. The point is that this law and a lot of these other laws are added to the lawsuits to try to increase the value of the settlement. Let's see, do we have?
The questions, there's a QA question, and it's in the chat as well, Ben,
Okay.
just around receiving the deck after the call. And then,
Okay. Yeah, we will be definitely sharing this out afterwards. So yeah, I built this with lots of text so that you can, easily refer to it later, share it with anyone that you think would be interested. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance here that this is just what I've understood and what I've found from, writing about these topics over the past couple years. And so yeah, there's a lot of these lawsuits and there's continuing to go on and some of them are yielding very high settlements. Another thing to note is that if your company were to go to court and go through all these legal proceedings for one of these, the legal defense fees on top of the settlement range from 500,000 to 2 million. So the costs are real. So, outside of what we just talked about, on the top privacy risks on websites and apps, I'll go through some more of these. So from the last slide, it was a clear thing that showed there was sensitive data. Now that's only 6 lawsuits. But overall, if your personal data sharing practices conflict with your privacy disclosures, that opens you up to breaking a number of laws. I've seen some that are just consumer protection laws, you know, laws related to fraud. The FTC, can get involved with some of those. So just having those things conflict um, would yeah increase your risk of a lawsuit, of course. So specifically with SEPA, so sharing data without any opportunity to opt out or against opt out, so violating CCPA, would increase your risk. We talked about sensitive data, so those are situations where, regardless of consent, this data typically shouldn't be shared, is what's going on. So you would need opt-in consent for a lot of the situations that we talked about on the last slide. One other thing that's noted a lot in CIPA cases are the session replay tools. So that would be something like Hotjar, Full Story. So these are tools that marketing teams use to figure out, basically measuring each user session. Where are they clicking? Where are they going? How do we get them to convert? All those types of things. So I've used some of these tools in my career, and they can capture, pretty much anything. Exactly what the person's typing. Everything they enter into a form, everything on the page. Right? If you know what page that they're on, that could be some sensitive data, right? It could be related to health, financial information, location, if they're buying a product that indicates something like sensitive. So these tools, in order to reduce the risk, that data needs to be blocked from these tools to ensure that it's not going out any further. So you can make sure that, yeah, none of those keystrokes, forms, sensitive data is being captured by these tools. So that's what you need to do. Third-party chatbots. So these are becoming very ubiquitous. And yeah, there's actually chatbot laws that are going on the books now. So having the right disclosures is critical for those. And then we talked about VPPA. So that's just specifically talking about your video viewing history data. And if that's shared with PII to third parties, that's pretty clear cut. You'll be breaking that law.
Ben, we
All
do
right,
have a
so
couple of questions if you wanted to take
yeah,
them, or we could wait.
yeah,
So in the chat, just for clarity's sake, anything we say is not legal advice and always seek
of
legal counsel, just because
course.
some of these are very much edging on legal counsel.
I'm just a
Um,
marketer. This is what I've understood from all the information that I've been
Yeah,
looking
and
at over
so
the
just
years.
John had a question around GPP signals and advertisers, and if she should use the framework. So again, definitely consult legal advice there. But GPP signals aren't inherently non-compliant simply because the data is still sent. It's a mechanism to communicate the user's choice and guarantee that the downstream is reflecting the user's decision. So little nuance. It's more around how you configure what you're sending and adhering to the consent choices of whatever user is saying yes or no through those signals. I think we have another question. Yes, there are additional settlements. We have collected a handful of them and didn't capture every settlement, but that's a really good call out about ed tech, especially because that has to deal with minor and children information too, most likely. So you have the different thresholds of under 13, between 13 and 18, and then adult. So that could be those are very important as well. Thanks for surfacing them. And yeah, tracking technologies for it is a big no-no, especially when you're dealing with underage too. That's a whole nother layer of concern, risk, and litigation. And then we have another question. Could the separate settlements theoretically be reached under each law? If you're violating a law and it's a state law and a federal law, you could get dinged on both from my perspective. Um, so that's my positioning. Again, not legal advice. Always seek legal counsel. But thank you guys for asking the question.
Yeah, yeah. I'll try my best to maybe add some color to these questions. Yeah, as far as the separate lawsuits, yeah, I'm by no means a legal expert. Just for what I've seen, typically the lawyers are stacking up allegations, right? They're violating 20 laws, and then they just have one payout, like one settlement, and say, "Hey, we're just gonna not admit to breaking them, but we're gonna pay you guys some money." So that's typically what I've seen. And yeah, ed tech, anything in terms of children's data, that's another factor that can add to any one of these lawsuits. That would definitely fall into the sensitive data category. Okay. There's another one. The CCPA regulations have specifics on how to meet the GPC requirements, as does the Colorado AG office. Okay. Yep, helping answer that question. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, moving on to CCPA. So, this is something that you might be more aware about. This is much more in the news. It's much more, yeah, explicit in terms of, what is CCPA compliance. Regulators have been handing down more enforcements recently, not nearly to the volume of these private lawsuits. So I'm going to run through what's going on so far this year there's been three CCPA enforcements. So we had Disney, so this was the largest one to date, almost 3 million. And so it involved a number of different issues, but yeah, to the point about GPC signals. So those were not being honored for a specific service. But then a bigger issue too is if you opt out on one service or device, it didn't opt you out on any other service or device. So Disney, this was a bigger case than most because they have so many services and you can log in and out. And so that there was, apparently you'd have to opt out 20 plus times. And even then, you still weren't opted out of all of the data sharing. They were still sharing data to advertising third parties. They just wouldn't be sending personalized ads from Disney. So they didn't want to lose out on that money externally. And then in some apps, there were just no opt-out options at all. So that was another issue. So that's another issue we've been seeing. Just yeah, outside of websites, if you're on a mobile app or CTV app, there's often not a way to opt out. So in addition to the settlement, there's a number of corrective measures they had to uh, abide by, and they have to submit progress reports every 60 days, and then annual reports for the next 3 years. We had Play on Sports. So this was one that involved children's data. So they were a ticketing service for high schools primarily, and there was no way to opt out from data sharing. They had a banner, but the only option was okay. And so then you were opting in, and GPC was unhonored. So they had a pretty clear-cut case there. And then Ford, they had an unusual setup, which I haven't seen, but clearly not following the CCPA regulations, is that you could opt out data sharing on their website, but then would send you an email. First of all, you had to submit a form with your email to opt out. And then they would send you an email to confirm. And then if you didn't confirm, they would still share your data. So the Cal Privacy said that once they submitted that form, they had opted out. So all the data that was shared after that was considered in violation of CCPA. So very specific around some of these opt-out procedures. Okay, so in terms of CCPA, we just talked about insufficient opportunity to opt out. Sometimes there's too much personal data required, GPC not honored, traditional opt-outs not honored, sensitive data, we talked about that a few different times. And then, yeah, we found in a couple of the CCPA enforcements that personal data was shared with third parties without a CCPA compliant contract. That was the case in the health line enforcement, I think in a couple other ones as well. So that's something that would be typically found out, once an investigation happens, is looking at, what data is being shared and do you have contracts with those companies that, have the right CCPA guidelines. All right, so going back to the CMP question, consent management platforms. So let's talk about what they do and what they do not do. And yeah, so from my experience, I mean, no means an expert in CMPs, but this is what I understand and what Patrick and I understand. So they just display privacy policy, so you can manage your privacy policy in these solutions. They collect consent. They might check to see if the banner is showing. They will limit data being shared, but it requires manual configuration. They will identify cookies and pixels and scripts and SDKs that are active on your website. They'll manage cookie and third-party categorization, but via a static library that does not typically update if there's new cookies. And a lot of times these libraries are out of date or just inaccurate. And then they'll help you display your user privacy center captured DSARs. What CMPs do not do, they don't run privacy compliance checks. So if they're scanning the website for cookies, they'll tell you there's these cookies on the website, but it doesn't tell you which ones are breaking which laws, right? It doesn't verify that personal data is not shared with advertisers after opt-outs, right? That's another check that would need to be done. Um, doesn't check detect any sensitive data that's being shared. It doesn't look at individual data elements and where they're being shared to. So it wouldn't be able to do that. Like I said before, it doesn't update the cookie library when cookies change. It doesn't prevent any issues with the tag manager. So, even if the right configurations are made in the CMP, if there's issues that are in the tag manager, which is what controls, what's firing, what's not firing, what data is being sent to a lot of these third parties, the CMP has no ability to address that. And then if any data is being shared before the CMP loads on the web page, which is a pretty common problem, right? If your metapixel is firing before the CMP even loads, CMP can do nothing to stop that. It doesn't, if there's a new web page, if there's the website changes, the app changes, the CMP is not going to adapt to that. There'd have to be a manual change, and there's no risk alerting for privacy teams. So these are all the reasons why companies are using Bravado AI and why they teams on this call are doing privacy auditing to address some of these shortcomings. So yeah, so we at Bravado AI we launched the first dedicated privacy auditing solution about a year and a half ago. And so before this, the typical model was trusting that CMPs were set up correctly, that manual tests were done correctly. But the reality is that there was widespread not compliance, and there's just not a scalable system to do this all manually. So we've built and launched now the leading solution to monitor websites and mobile apps with continuous auditing to ensure that all the checks we just talked about, that your website is 100% compliant, or at least you know all the risks that are there and you can figure out exactly how to address them. So yeah, I want to jump into a demo of our web and app auditor, showing how it detects all the third-party activity, but also runs these compliance checks to show where there's non-compliant data sharing. It verifies that the banners are compliant, that their CMPs and your links are adhering to not just the regulations on this webinar today, but really any regulation worldwide. And then it will generate tickets automatically that you can shows the evidence, shows what needs to be changed, and that can be sent out to your web team, your app team for quick remediation. So overall, kind of summing up why companies purchase Bravado AI for web and app auditing, they are able to immediately find and fix their company's biggest privacy compliance risks. Right? These are the risks that are causing the most lawsuits and enforcements for any privacy related issue. All right, you're reducing the risk of multi-million dollar penalties, expensive legal fees, and so typically only once one of these investigations would start is when other data privacy practices would come into question, right? Your data subject access requests, your data retention, your data minimization, like your contracts, risk assessments. Those are not going to be typically investigated unless there's an issue with the website or an app. Otherwise, there's not as much publicly available to trigger such an investigation. With a website or app, anyone can go on the website. Particularly websites are easier. That's why there's more website lawsuits. But or mobile app, and they can see what is firing, what data is being shared when they opt out and when they don't opt out. And so and they literally have screenshots in these uh, lawsuits just showing, individual John Doe used this website, and it just has screenshots of all the data being shared, and then the lawsuit's generated. So once you've got this in place, you can then prevent future risks as websites change. You can identify them in real time and make a fix. You can replace manual, costly audits. So some teams will even pay a third party to do a manual auditing service, and those can be very expensive, timely, and they're not as comprehensive or foolproof. And then, with these solutions, there's no implementation required. You don't need to change your CMP. You can just start scanning immediately and then start reducing risk for your company. Okay, that's all I had. Yeah, I think it's been plenty of time for a demo, and then yeah, we're happy to answer questions now or at the end of this.
Yeah, there's a few questions in there, Ben. Would you mind getting to those as I pull up my side? It looks like Jack has been sending some notes on that we can only see. So there is a link for Colorado where you can do opt out through the government that he shared. Thank you, Jack. Um, do we audit SPP? We audit anything that is on the website for network calls and cookies, and I'll show you a little bit more of what we're doing. It might help answer your question through the demo as well. Logging for security purposes for audit. Have there been any lawsuits involving that? Nothing that I've seen personally. Those can usually be strictly necessary for logging as long as you're not doing anything kind of sketchy, if you will, from my perspective. So we do see like logging tools for like error logging and stuff like that being in play, but I haven't seen any lawsuits for people using that. Again, from my position, I would consider that strictly necessary, not giving legal advice.
But yeah, the logging one, I would agree. And all the lawsuits I've seen are data sharing to third parties, and it's almost always advertising third parties. So they're following that CCPA standard, even though SEPA doesn't say anything about advertising third parties, doesn't know what an advertising pixel is, but they're following that same standard typically.
So getting in here, can you guys see the screen all right, Ben? I guess I should ask you. Can you see the screen
Yes.
all right? Thank you, sir. I'll go a little zoom in here just to make it bigger. So within Bravado, this is the dashboard. I'm in my sandbox environment here. And so what we have is our UI. I'll make it a little smaller so we can see a little bit more. But so we have privacydarkpatterns.com. Just advice, don't go to that website. It's our dummy test environment and it has a bunch of issues that we use to show. But it's a great example of what Bravado can do. So within here, you can see we've run a specific URL. It's surfaced various issues, third parties, cookies, data elements, etc. And within Bravado, it's really simple. You don't need any tech support. The only time that we need anyone to assist is if you guys have really good security. We just need to allow list the proxy and the IPs so that we can scan and get through your great security. Really, all you need to do is come in here, type google.com, and then you pick whichever region jurisdictions you're operating in. So US gold standard, we'd scan against California. EU, I'd probably scan against the UK and Germany, a mainland and a Brexit, if you will, because I have seen differentiation since Brexit happened between the two. And so it really just is whatever target or wherever you're operating, or maybe you're moving into a new market and you want to make sure that everything looks good, you can select your regions and scan. And what we'll do is we'll go via IP to those various regions and scan from that geofence. So that's just like a user going to your website. So what we're reenacting is the user's experience on the website through automation. And so within here too, you're able to set defaults of where you want to scan, so you don't have to type that out every time. You can set cadence. Most of my teams are on a weekly or monthly cadence to rescan the websites. This builds a good history over time, and we can see when marketing is kind of bearing or digital is bearing the privacy team. And I'll show you guys what that looks like in a sec. We have the ability to send email summary. So this would send on Monday, giving you a snapshot of what occurred, which is why most of my teams set weekly scans. And then you could set various benchmarking for various different organizations. I just picked a random assortment of different accounts that I use personally. And so that'll give you a high level benchmark of where they fall in consideration to you. And it's just a nice insight to help maybe position a little bit more that maybe we need more advertising on our website, or maybe we have way less third parties or way more cookies and gives you a nice little perspective there. Within here, everything kind of operates on kind of two rungs. And so based on whatever geolocation you pick, will surface various insights. So you're all very much probably aware that in the EU and Quebec, other global regions, it's an opt-in scenario. So the user has to explicitly consent. I want you to collect my information, and then we trigger the third parties. The US, a little bit differently. So we have the opt-out and GPC signals. We're checking on all of those things for us. So I'm going to click in. Everything operates on policies for Privado. So we automatically trigger checks for opt-in, opt-out. We also have additional checks I'll get into in a second that are really helpful for compliance and governance. In here, this is our trend graph for one website scan. And so you could see in gray, this is total open issues. Green is the good. We're fixing different issues week over week or month over month. And then the new are the new things that are introduced that we were not seeing previously. And so as we trigger rescans, anything that your teams have fixed, either natively or through direction, will just get closed out if we're no longer seeing those as issues. So you don't have to admin over micromanage what's going on here, which is great. We get some snapshots. So you see various benchmarking. So this is where those benchmarks lie in comparison to us. We can also toggle on a little benchmark here so we can see kind of where those others fall on average, which is super cool. And then some nice little snapshots of what's new over the last 7 days. This is really good for operations teams, and you can adjust those as needed. And so with that, this is kind of just our overview summary. The fun happens in the tests and issues. These are both the same. They're just spliced a little bit differently. So this just gives you a nice little UI. Each policy that we're applying, which I'll go through, is very nicely articulated here. If you're more in the tactical space and you're moving quick through things, the issues view is really good, and it's a table view. And we have additional designations for impact, prioritization, and we're working on tagging other team members. So this will be a collaborative space, just like a Google Sheet in the near future. So in here, you can see we have our opt-in compliance check. And the reason this was triggered is because I selected France and the UK for my test. And so what we're doing first and foremost is seeing, is there a banner? We can't do any checks to validate if consent's working if there's no banner in play for the EU. It's a requirement. So we'll take a little screenshot for you. You'll be able to see that proof of the pudding in there. And then we can go through the next checks. So no action. I have not done anything. The page is loaded. I haven't engaged with the page. I haven't touched anything. What's still poking through the cracks? Because you guys have spent numerous hours most likely setting up your consent management platforms and your global privacy control signals and tag managers. And you want to ensure that it's honoring Patrick and Ben when they go to your site so that we're not violating trust and getting into hot water with both our clients and regulators. And so what we're doing here, you can see we're checking for both network calls and we're checking for cookies. And so they're two separate checks. I'll do the no action check. And so in here, you could see a list of the third parties that are violating user consent through interacting with the banner. They're not getting blocked even when the banner loads. And so you can see these are commonly advertisers. I'll pick on TikTok because who doesn't like picking on TikTok? And within here, you can kind of see, you can send a Jira. We have different statuses, and these are getting updated soon. So we're doing a little overhaul here for some more function. But as you're working with teams, you can update, you can send it to their native environment to help you out. And so in here, you could see this issue was present last year, first surfaced at this point. We get some understanding of what's going on. So TikTok is making a call without user consent in France. And so we get some guidance what's applied. No third party request should be going without explicit consent. You get a little blurb on TikTok if you didn't know what TikTok was. And then you can kind of see criticality and you can assign stuff if you want to. Metadata is optional, but in the meat of it, we can see this updated on my scan this morning. So this is still present, still an issue that we need to work on. We can even get SLA out of this. And in here, you can see there's a bunch of calls. So if I click in, you can see we get the initiator chain and call stack. You can dig into the call stack, but the fun is in the initiator chain. So what Bravado is doing is showing once this website loads, these are the flows of what loads underneath it, and it's a chain. And so we can see that TikTok's getting loaded, and the reason why TikTok's getting loaded most like is because of Google's configuration, Google Tag Manager's configuration. And so what we do is we summarize all of these scripts or our problem children, if you will. And if we just go and address this Google Tag Manager script and make sure that it's set to deny TikTok when the user's selection is made or before it's made, then these will all clear out and you'll not have the risk of TikTok Ad Manager firing outside of user consent. Now we do that for reject all too, and we have the same thing for cookies as well. So if a cookie's landing on the site, we'll be able to check on it. I'll give TikTok a little rest and move over to Snapchat for this one. Don't want to beat them up too much. So that you can say this is the same, but with a cookie. And so down here, we can see non-essential cookie X-AB from StaticNet categorizes targeting set before the user validated. And you could see this one's a Google one. Sometimes they're directly sewn, and by that I mean they're just put onto the site, not through Google, and it's another configuration mode. So that's kind of the EU perspective or the global perspective. The US perspective here is California, and we're checking for GPC signals and clicking on the banner. And if you don't have a banner, we'll just not check that because we won't be able to, and you'll just have the GPC check if you're not at a banner position yet for your org. Does the same thing as the checks for EU. So opt out once you click that button. All the advertisers and trackers should be turned off. We can still have the functional and analytics here on this state side. And then same for GPC, except with GPC, that signal should be received immediately and be honored the second that user enters your website, unlike with clicking the opt out button, where it has to happen after they click the opt out button. So that's where California is moving to next year, is trying to get more towards the GPC so that a user can set their own browser and every site should be able to receive that signal and say, yes, target Patrick. No, don't target Patrick. So we're advancing, the states are advancing, and we're catching up a little bit to our counterparts across the pond. Down here, this is kind of where we have what I consider Big Brother. So we have direct audit checks, and then we have Big Brother checks, secondary, tertiary, and it's just to understand additional details around compliance and governance. So do we have a reject button, and is the button color contrast different, or is it the same? Think Han-defined in that kind of regard. So wanting to make sure that we do have a reject button. If we do, it's the same color contrast, not making one more attractive than the other. Um, if you're not in direct control of the CMP, this one's super handy. And you're in full control of turning these on or off under our policies. And so under Web Auditor, if you guys don't have a specific regulation applied to you or don't need a specific check, we can just turn those off so you don't see them, which is great. We can also build additional policy checks by collaborating with your CSM team. So we built a lot of these checks based on our own clients seeking additional insight based on what their needs are. Down here, we have additional regulatory link checks. So some apply in some locations, others don't. Obviously, the UK Modern Slavery Act only going to be applied to the UK. Now, not everyone needs to do that. So it would be a conversation with your legal team of what you should check on or what you shouldn't. Another big brother check. Are you using a piggyback mechanism from Google Analytics? Is your marketing team using this data or not? I'm not saying you're violating user consent necessarily, but just saying, hey, you're doing some extra collections. Do you need to? Google consent mode, this is really important for my teams. So right now, Google has variables they collect, GCD, GCS, MPA. We're checking on those to ensure that those are de-identifying users and you're not violating consent. This is as important from my perspective as opt-in and opt-out. Below here, really cool, cookie duration for 395, 13-month expiration, or are we set to 400 days to expire, going against the revamp of having cookies reset. And then uncategorized cookie check. This would be for OneTrust users. We're able to pick on their C categories that they display externally to the user in the inspect. And so we'll pick up on if there's an uncategorized cookie that just has not been assigned a category yet. Checking on timing deployment. So if the categorization's right, but it's really you have your vendor code up here and your blocker code down here, we'll call out that you need to flip-flop that, and that'll clear out most of your issues. And then deep dive, are we tracking users? Do we have sensitive data? Are we sharing video movie titles? So these are all of the checks that we have today. There's a couple additional custom checks that I'm not showing, but really the world is your oyster and you'll have a deep dive understanding of all risk across the board. Um, any questions, Ben, before I keep going?
No, I think the one thing that I want to go into next is just, in addition to these checks, is how we check for accurate cookie categorization or miscategorization.
Yeah.
That your CMP is not going to be able to. It's going to be the cause of a lot of those underlying issues because there's a categorization problem.
Yeah. And so in here, each one of these third party through storage is your source of truth, regardless of consenting action, what's on your site. And we can see at which phases. So Google Ad Manager is a part of the accept and no action phase of the user's experience. And then in here, we can see which vendors are collecting the data elements, like Ben was stating, where you're not going to get this through a CMP provider. So it gives you additional insight onto risk. And we'll have a full collection of those data elements in here for you as well. And that's what would trigger if any of these were high sensitivity, we would flag those and call out an issue for you, and you could see all the data flows. What we have scripts cookie storage. I'll get to cookies. This is the really cool part, and I'll get to the cookie side page. So we're doing cookie research now, utilizing AI to scour the internet for sources and giving you a comparison. So in here we can see the cookies tethered to source, who's hosting, CMP category. This will be available if you're a OneTrust user, again, because they're showing that externally. The other vendors aren't so keen on us tapping into theirs and auditing their tools, so we're working on getting through to that. But in here, this is the cookie research. So you'll be able to see exactly what Bravado is picking up and giving you a confidence rating. Usually the confidence is less than high if it could be toggled on or off for different functions, or if maybe two legal departments have different opinions on it. But most of the time, it's kind of just up to the use if the confidence ratio is not high. We'll call out the CPRA. So this is just understanding if that should be included in opt-out or not from the US and how risky it is depending on what kind of vendor it's coming from. And we can do a deep dive into those cookies here. So it'll show you, these are global views. So if we have 1,000 websites, it'll show you all cookies here. And I'll pick on TikTok a little bit more. But once we click in here, this is where we have a high level of fidelity. And you could even see what our confidence ratio is and the direct sources in which we got our understanding for why TTP should be a targeting cookie. So that research is in there for you guys. So once you scan your website, you'll never have to question what the cookie's doing and can help you categorize correctly. We've even seen it the inverse of not that you have something that's marked as strictly necessary, like if you had TikTok as strictly necessary and you were getting violations because of that. But we've seen it in the inverse where you had a cookie set to maybe targeting when it was functional, and you could have loaded that cookie in the US. So we can flip the script a little bit too and help marketing improve and get more data that they need. Lastly, for web, before I move over to mobile for the last amount of time that we have this visualization. So if you're a visual learner or you're trying to really understand the hierarchy of your website, this is a depiction of third parties from the California perspective, and we can switch these around. I'll show you the cookie perspective, but you could see website loads, first tier of scripts and cookies and pixels that load, and then how these additional ones are getting on. So you could see Google Tag Manager has 9 nodes, and they're loading all of these additional vendors, and then these vendors are in turn loading additional. And so you can kind of see the chain, additional insights. We flip the issues view. This would be just the third parties that are causing issues. All those different network call and cookie checks that I was looking at before, those are here as well. So if you're more of a visual person, you can navigate onto this side and you'll be able to see exactly what's going on here. On the flip side of the script, if you're trying to see how a cookie got landed on your site, I'll pick on TikTok some more over here. We can either double click in or we could search up top. I'll double click in. Here's good old TikTok. And so now you can see once this loads, we load our website loads, then Google Tag Manager loads, which loads TikTok Ad Manager, which loads a script, which loads a script, which drops your cookie. So all this is available. You can take pictures, send that to teams, but just another good way to kind of visualize that hierarchy, especially when there's some complexity going on. But yeah, a really deep dive audit of your website. And then moving over to mobile apps. So really with mobile apps, we can upload from your dev file, whether that's the APK for Android or IPA for iOS. Think beer for iOS. And we'll be able to scan and understand what third parties are in play for various scenarios on your mobile app, what data elements they're collecting, what SDKs are in play, and then what permissions are in play. And with the SDKs and permissions, regardless of what scenario we're testing, we'll read the static files and get you a full list of those SDKs. So within here, I picked on the LA Sun app and did a test. You can see I pulled this from the Google Play Store and just used the URL. This is the direct URL if you were to download the app to your phone. And so this interacts just, and it will load a phone on your screen and you'll run through a scenario test. And then once you're done with whatever scenario test, you'll hit submit, and then we'll digest the third party's data elements and any issues that are surfaced, just like we would do for the website. And so in here, you can see we have a newer version. So right now you can view version history. I'm on 6 point something. It's pulling from the Play Store and getting the latest version because for mobile app security posture, if it's not the latest version, it'll ask you to go to the Play Store to get it. So to help move to automation here, we're just pulling that for you so you don't have to deal with your tech team and try and get the latest version every time. So within here, what I did was a test against video data sharing. I searched for cough syrup in their app just to see if that would get detected or sent outbound on a search mechanism to advertisers. There were a couple videos playing, and so you could see that within here, video data shared with metrics Bright Cove. We got double click, Bright Cove, and another double click in here. And if I click in, we can kind of see so that we can just not get violated by the VPPA lawsuits. And so in here, this is how the sausage is made. I won't bore you, but it works very similarly to the other one. So we got the data elements. You can see how the sausage was made. And if it's redacted, that was us just for privacy concern. So password gets redacted at times. And then we tell you where we found it. So you can go look into it with your teams. Got the Jira, got the open in here. We didn't have any sensitive data sharing, so no precise location, no gender, those kind of things. And those are all customizable. We did have some no action or some issues on no action and reject all for the opt-in scenario. I did this out of California just to give some more insight. So this would be a way to collect all your third parties that were triggering outside of this piece. So you can dig in and see if there's any violations. So what a lot of my teams are doing right now is they're testing to get an understanding of what's on their device. I would say most teams that I work with do not have a CMP in place. And a lot of reason for that is regulators weren't looking there, focusing on the website. A lot of times too, you have a logged in experience. And in that logged in experience, teams have already said yes to terms and conditions. So a lot of my teams are checking to ensure their terms and conditions are accurate. Because that's a kind of get out of jail free mechanism at this point is they accepted terms and conditions and approved of this consent to begin with. Now I have teams that are building CMP on top of that so that they can opt out easier if they want to, and giving them some more flexibility. So in here, it would show whatever test you did. So you can see I have a cough syrup test, and then I just named one test. Naming is important so you can filter between the tests and just see what was in play for those. So in here, you could see the various collections, nothing super, super crazy, but gives you a good understanding of what's going on. And then on the flip side of the flavor, we can see what third parties were involved in that specific scenario that I was testing for. So a lot of my teams, if you're a food ordering app, a movie watching app, a gaming app, running through why the user would be using the tool and then just understanding risk. Another way teams are using it is for new features. So when a team releases a new feature, they'll load the app, log in, and we have a button to clear network logs, and that'll clear everything before and start recording at this point so that they can get a clear depiction of what's occurring from that point on, and then call out risk. SDK list is really cool for a lot of teams. So even security teams have been really liking this. So you can kind of filter by SDK category. If we're at the infancy again and just trying to understand what third parties are in play. Oop, my filters just screwed up on me 1 sec. Live demo. Let me go back 1 sec. But you could filter to just which third party SDKs were occurring at that point. Let me get back in. And that gives teams a really clear depiction of like what they should put under a CMP or a logged in experience. And then you can see in here, view new history. We keep those old records and you could download them so you could see change over time. And then we'll test on the new version and we'll kind of ask you, hey, you're looking at the old stuff. Do you want to look at the new stuff? And you can switch between versions. So that's why this little pop-up happened for me. And then lastly, we'll have permissions over here. So this will read the technical jargon, if you will. From my perspective, I'm layman. So some of these you could kind of understand. But what we're doing is we're writing that using AI into human English. So we can kind of get an idea if we're doing like an over collection or like, oh, we have biometric permission. I didn't even know we were using biometrics. Let's go do a DPIA on this. Why are we doing this? So just deep insights here. And then in test scenarios, this is where you'll be able to see what tests you have. You can download the test. So if I need to share this with Ben on what I actually did, you get the MP4, and then it'll be spliced by whichever regions you're testing against. So if I did the EU, you can do that down here. Um, Ben, any questions? I know we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, we're almost at time. Yeah, there was a question about whether AI is being used that complicates oversight or checks and how that affects data mining. Yeah, the obviously AI is being integrated with all of our technology now, but that doesn't affect what we're able to track on websites. That right, whatever data is being shared, to these third parties through pixels, it's scripts, it's still using the same technology, and we're still able to track that all the same. I mean, the maybe the bigger issue is that you might be sending data to third-party AI tools that can create more compliance risks, or could be internal tools that again are creating compliance risks. So we would be able to track, what data, like each data element is being shared with what tool. And that might trigger a compliance issue that you might want to address. Okay, I think we're at time and we went through a lot, and thanks for the questions. Hopefully we were able to answer most all of them. But yeah, we are happy to answer more questions, after the webinar. We'll be sending out, like I said, the recording, the slides. We'll be sending out two playbooks we just launched on our website. They're talking about preventing SEPA lawsuits, preventing CCPA enforcement. So look out for those. And yeah, if you're interested in seeing a deeper demo or getting a free website scan, so we offer a free audit of your website to identify any compliance risks. Please submit that. We'll have uh, a link in the email following up. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We've had a webinar 2 weeks from today about making a bigger, kind of more comprehensive business case for privacy, and so you can secure more budget, push through more privacy initiatives and making that case outside of just enforcement, which is what I talked a lot about today in litigation. So we're gonna have two privacy leaders on who have worked on this exact topic. Aaron Weller from HP and Stephen Robinson, who was a CPO at Ryco USA. So yeah, we'll send out that in our email. But yeah, that's my last plug. Thanks, Patrick, for the demo. Like,
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
very thorough.
Thanks, team. Thanks for being
All
so
right.
engaged.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Bye.